Chapter 8 of History of Japan in Words of One Syllable. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of Japan in Words of One Syllable by Helen Ainslie Smith. Chapter 8 The Ways of War in Feudal Times. It was in Yoritomo's day that feudalism spread itself through most all parts of the realm. It got its start back near the close of the 8th century, when the court made the plan to have a force of home ranks in each part of the realm, and to raise such a host of new troops had said that all those of the rich farm folks who were strong and smart, and who knew how to use the bow and ride a horse well, should bear arms, and form a new class, known as the samurai, while the rest, who were weak of mind or limb, should keep on and till the soil. And, more than that, it was said that there should be not to keep any of the samurai who fought well and bore themselves like true knights from the high posts that a man-at-arms could hold. Thus there was a prize in view for each of these farm-born guards, and not a few of them soon won a place and high rank in their troops. But ere a plain man like this could be put in charge of the Mikado's troops, he must needs go to Kyoto to serve as a court page, wait on some great lord, or fill some place where he could learn how things were done in the name of the throne. But they learnt more than that at court. They learnt how court folks did for themselves at Kyoto. They saw the strife for rank and fame that went on all the time with the lords great and small. And when they went back to their homes, their minds were full of plans to do the same thing in a small way. The folks where they dwelt were sure to think more of them for their stay at Kyoto, and all they must have learnt of the ways at court than of those who had not been to town. And so they oft came to rule quite large parts of the fiefs in which they dwelt. When they were sent for at Kyoto, they would not go, nor did the Kuge governors of the fiefs dare to do aught to them, for they had arms and steeds and men in their train to make up a good strong band for fray. In this way, a large class grew up and spread through Japan, who called themselves men-at-arms, though they would serve any great chief for pay, and who did a great deal to help on small feuds and clan fights, which were apt to spread till the whole fief was in a brawl. And the court would have to send out a force in charge of a taira or gen chief to check the strife. Now these chiefs, or shoguns, would not make up all their force from the ranks of the realm, but would get the aid of some such bands as those he was sent to quell, who were not yet in the brawl, but were at all times glad to take part in a fray if they knew they would be well paid for it. Thus you see these men who took up arms in their own right grew more strong and not less so, as would have been best for the court rule. And as time went on, there grew to be ties that bound the men in clans to this or that chief for whom they fought, so that they would not leave him for anything. In the meantime, the folks came to feel more and more that the court had lost its hold on them, and while they still thought of the Mikado as their great king, the son of heaven, whose word was law and who owned them as his slaves, they did not serve him, but some great name, or daimyo, as the Japanese say, in his stead. To the clan of some strong prince they would be bound for peace and war. they would fight his cause with glad hearts, and if he were slain, they would die too. By their strength and zeal, he could soon claim the whole fief, and rule all folks as much as those who bore his arms. Those who worked the farms, kept shops, or plied a trade, all came at last to be in the care of some chief, to whose fort-like house they could flee in time of harm, and whose band of brave men-at-arms was on hand at all times to do his will. And the tax, which was of so much rice, these folks did not pay to the realm, as had been their wont, but to their chiefs, who spent their wealth on their clans, on themselves, and their homes. The home of a daimyo, with its walls and moats, its vast courts and high towers, was like a great fort, within which was a small town. At its gates there was a lodge, where a guard of armed men was kept at all times. And though a man from some other clan might be made at home in all parts else of the great chief's house, he was not at any time let to go into the fort inside, where the daimyo's arms and wealth were kept. This was the rule with all clans. The Japanese knights, like those of the West, had a high sense of what was due their chief and right for themselves, and a long code of rules as to what was due them from both friend and foe, and what they should do to both. No man held so low a rank that by brave deeds and good faith to his chief he might not rise to a high place in charge of a large force, with a great name and much wealth. And when such a rise was made, it was a grand time in the fort and through the whole fief. The samurai, of which these knights were one class, have long been the most bright type of all the Japanese folks. They have done more than hold the fiefs and fight the wars of their clans. They were her first travelers, and men of books and of arts. They, we are told, are the men whose minds have been the best and the most quick to learn, and the most wise to act. It was of this class that the plan of feudalism was born, and it was they who broke it up, swept down the shogun rule in 1868, put the reins once more in the Mikado's hands, and said, "We will send our young men to the Great West, and will wake Japan out of her past, and make her a realm of the New World." They were in the Middle Ages, as now, the soul of the realm. As they are now the best men, in this new age of peace they were the best chiefs, the best rank and file in the old days. A samurai, then, was not seen out of doors that he did not have his two swords, a long and a short one, at his belt. A guard was at the gate of his house, or his fort, if he was a great man, all the time. And on the porch, in front of his house, there were spears, both great and small, bows and darts, and more than one war-axe would be set on their butts to be at hand in case of need. In the halls were coats of mail and all the dress for war, as well as long spears, which the women of the house knew how to use in case foes should come on the place when the men were not there. The men-at-arms of those days bore shields, and wore casques and suits of mail, made of chain or of scales, some of iron, brass, or steel, and some of shark skin, or the hide of beasts made hard. More stuffs than these were made use of sometimes, for in their war tools, as in all their home things, the Japanese made great use of lacquer, a sort of fine, hard varnish that they made from the gum of a tree and spread on metals, on wood, on paper, and a great many things, to give them a hard surface, as well as to make them smooth and bright to look at. The Japanese ranks were a fine sight to see when they set out for the field of war. since the land was so much made up of hills and vales, or the wet plains where rice grew, they had small use for horsemen, and most of the troops were on foot. The race, you know, as a rule, is not so large as ours, but the men were straight and of good shape, bore their arms well, and made a bright show with their suits of black, white, blue, green, gold, and silver mail, the gay cords that bound their sword hilts, and their grand crests, and the silk of their dress that could be seen here and there when there was a gap in the mail. They bore tall spears in their hands that caught the sun, and the casques of their chiefs were sometimes as much as 3 feet tall. Drums, sticks of hard wood with which to clap, and conch shells made up their band, and gave them the calls of the march, the camp, and the field. The Japanese learnt many arts of war from the Chinese through Korea, but, as with all that they learnt from that land, they made much change in them to suit their own needs. For a time they would try one mode, then some new one, but at last, in the rule of the Ashikaga, 2 men brought forth the best that had yet been tried, and that was kept in use till the great change of late years, when the Japanese gave up their own modes of warfare for those of Europe. In the field, a rain of darts from which was most of the time the way a fray began. Then there would be a fight for the length of the whole line for a time till the strife grew so fierce that the ranks got in one great mob, where each man's sole thought was to cut off all the heads he could with his sword. It was not a rare thing for the chief of each side to come out in front of the ranks, and to spare their troops end the strife by one hand-to-hand fight. When they met by chance in the great fray, it would be the same. Their men would slack their strife. They could give no aid to their chiefs, but had to stand to one side to watch the fight, and each band would call the name of their own man to cheer him on. The fight would rage till one of them had cut off the head of his foe. Then, with the poor wretch's head held high in his hand, he would shout his name, and yell it out that he had won the day. This would bring the strife to the same end as if the whole force of the foe had been cut down, and the clan of the chief who had won would shout their praise of his feat. Then those who had slain any foes of note had to pass in front of him and show the heads they had cut off, at which he would give them such gifts as were thought meet for such brave deeds. If any had saved the life of the chief on the field, he was raised to a post of most high rank in the clan. On the side that lost, those men who had been hurt would fall on their swords or kill themselves in some way, so as not to fall into the hands of their foes. And any chief or man of note in the ranks would cut or flay his face so that it would not be known by the foes. For if they found it, they would take great pride in it, and put it in some place where scores of folks would see it and say how great was the man who could kill him. This was the right thing for all true knights to do in those days. And more than that, there would be not a few of a chief's men who, though not hurt at all, would take their own lives, for it was not right, they thought, that they should live if their chief was slain. When a force laid siege to a fort or a town, or the great house of some daimyo, they built up in front of their camp a sort of screen of planks, with a steep slant. At the gates of these stood guards. A watch was kept on the hills, in high trees or towers, built up for that use, and sometimes huge kites that would hold a man were flown, and a bird's eye view was got of what lay within the walls of the foe. The facts thus learnt had much to do with the way the siege went on. Sometimes the plan would be to starve them out. Sometimes to set fire to them or shoot at them at long range. Sometimes feints of goodwill would be made or a ruse would be tried. And then, if all else were in vain, a charge would be made and the hosts would fall on the fort, smash in the gates, scale the walls, and take the place by storm. And at the point of the sword, if the folks could not cut them down and drive them back, ere they got so far. The work of those who held the civil posts in the realm was not great in these days. They had to see that the folks were dealt with in just terms, that those who did wrong paid for their crimes, that no man took or had to give up more than his due. They had to hear both sides of no end of small feuds, and set them at rest, and to take the tax from the folks at set times. This was quite a gay time with the farm folk. When the rice crops were well in, each man would put the share that he was to pay to the realm in straw bags, and fix it in nice shape to go to the town where he must pay it. Then in fet dress himself, and with his horse made gay with the flaps and straps of red, a small bunch of bells here and there, he would put the rice bags on the beast, and set off to pay his tax, and have a good time with the friends he would be sure to meet on the road and at the end of the route. End of chapter 8.